Looking forward to it. Audio's working here, but we can hear you just fine on this end.
Awesome. Where in the world are you?
I am in South Florida, and it's pretty chaotic down here right now with the coronavirus.
Yeah, I hear you're all at the beach.
We would love to be, but they closed those down. The spring breakers are not happy.
Okay. Awesome. Hey, Giovanna, how are you?
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good. Sorry, you had to cancel your HR.
I know. You have to cancel everything. They're even talking about canceling Tri-State. So I don't know.
That's in May, right?
April.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Jennifer's here.
Hi.
Hello.
I have the wrong thing with the window in back of me, but everything else is trash in the car. So
this new apartment?
Yeah, I just kind of moved everything back and forth myself last week, so it just got thrown in here. But it looks like I have a lot of time now to organize and plan things.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, how are you faring out there with the virus and stuff?
Oh, last week was probably the best week and the worst week to be offline for the most part. So I'm just kind of settling in and trying to stay out of everything else right now. Our state's kind of doing a lot on making sure that people are staying apart. And the good news is I work from home. So the bad news is that there's no work to be done right now in terms of speaking, but obviously this is not, a much bigger issue than that.
Yep. All right. I see Alyssa's joined us, and Joel, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Good.
Where are you from?
I'm calling from the suburbs of Chicago, so it's a rainy day here, but in the twilight zone. But
I like that.
Yeah, but it's but doing okay. I mean, I'm excited about the community on this call. I mean, I think there's from the client work that I have, things are in some ways busier than ever. But I think some real questions about what does that mean for new business? How are we available to support in a way that seems authentic, but at the same time is an acknowledgement that we need to make money off of this. So that's
I've seen a lot of comments on Facebook and Twitter about HR tech vendors saying that this is not the time to go, start sending sales emails for that kind of stuff. So I think it's the time to be helpful and try and contribute some positive conversations into the ecosystem here.
right.
So let's see, Deanna's here. Alyssa, are you there?
I am here. I just have myself on mute because
Alyssa is our ambassador at Trail Lancers. So
yes.
How's it going in Texas?
It's going. Oddly enough, I think that rain from Chicago just made a beeline straight for Texas. So we've got a lot of rain here too.
Right. And,
You're welcome.
Thanks.
How's it going, Jenny?
It's going pretty good. Sorry.
Loose?
Everything's good.
All right. And Shayna, you're new. Where are you from?
Hi, I am from Springfield, Missouri.
All right. Kelly's here. Hi, Kelly. Hey, Regina.
Hey, Chris. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay. We haven't started yet. We're just kind of hanging out.
Hi, everyone.
We'll let's do like 2 or 3 more minutes. Let people chime in here. Any other major issues or topics on your mind these days other than the virus?
So is everyone going into hiring freeze?
Yeah, I did a little podcast today on Twitter, and it seems like it's for the most part, it's hiring freezes are happening. It's a little sporadic too, depending on what industry you're in.
Yeah.
I've seen all the things, all the spectrum here in terms of, hey, we're hiring, we're freezing, we're just pausing for a couple weeks just to see what it's like.
Right.
So I'm seeing a lot of job seeker tweets out there. Hey, they just put the job on hold.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see that for the next couple of weeks at least. But, all right, well, let's be cognizant of everyone's time here, and I'd like to welcome everybody to HR Lancers Live. This is our second ever event, so glad you're all here, and we're gonna have one next week as well. So next week I'll be talking about favorite apps for HR freelancers. So I'll be coming out to the show talking about the different tools I use in my everyday life that make things easy for me. So apps, websites, things like that. So for that show, I asked everyone to bring 1 or 2 apps that they use on a regular basis, and kind of we'll build a big list here, and I'll make a blog post out of that for the community itself, and just try to educate everyone what people are using out there overall. So that's Thursday at 4 o'clock, the 26th overall. So our guest of honor is here, Jennifer McClure, up there in the upper left in my screen anyway, and she's dialed in from Cincinnati, Ohio. And she's someone I've known for probably about, I would say 10 years, I think, Jennifer, roughly,
Probably.
somewhere
Yeah,
around
I
there.
guess, I guess we've passed the decade mark. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's been in the industry for a long time, HR consultant. She's spoken at over 350 events, according to her website there. And Jenny, last week at the last call, Jenny said, I want to learn more about how to speak in HR. And the first person I thought of was you, Jennifer. So that's why I invited you to come onto the show here. So I guess start out by just telling us about your background and kind of how you got into speaking in the first place, if you would.
Sure. And again, I apologize for my setup. I just moved. This is my second day in my new apartment, and nothing has a place, nor can I find anything. So
That's good.
so I'm sitting the exact opposite away from the light, but that's the way it is right now. So my background is I spent about 20 years of my career in the corporate world in HR leadership and executive roles. Always had responsibility for recruiting for the whole organization and all of my corporate life there. Left the corporate world in early 2006 and went to work for an executive search firm here in the Cincinnati area, mainly to learn kind of how to develop business and how to build relationships. I'm a card-carrying introvert, and so when the company that I worked for was sold and I found myself without a job and not really wanting to go back into corporate leadership, a lot of great people gave me advice on not starting my own business right away because they said, you don't know how to develop business. You've never done anything like that. So that was wonderful advice that I will forever be grateful for. And the recruiting firm that I went to work for was very different, in my opinion, than a lot of recruiters that I had worked with. It wasn't a transaction kind of oriented firm, very relationship focused people and wonderful people who taught me a lot. So I spent about 3.5 years there in executive search. During that time, and kind of there was a transition time in between the corporate life and the time at the executive search firm. I had engaged a career coach, and he made me go out and network again, which I had not ever really done. And I met a lot of really wonderful people, as I said, who gave me some great advice. And during that time, I came across a gentleman at an executive networking meeting who was sharing kind of his experience of being in job search. He was a CEO, had recently joined another company. And one of the things that he mentioned was that so many people were helpful to him in his transition that he made a decision to give away 10% of his time once he became employed to helping others. And I liked the way that sounded. And so when I started at the search firm, of course, if you're familiar with executive search consultants, usually they're working on behalf of, well, they are working on behalf of clients, so they don't spend a lot of time necessarily interacting with people who aren't a good fit for the roles that they're currently working on. You know, they'll put you in their database, et cetera. So I decided I would give away 10% of my time for senior executives in career transition to help them, you know, just listen to their story, to help them with their resume, to talk about networking as an introvert. There are a lot of us out there, and just to be a safe place. So allowed, you know, 4 hours or so of my week to be able to help other people. And LinkedIn was relatively new during that time. And so I started sharing with them. I had gotten on LinkedIn, I'm member number 5 million something. So behind people like Chris, I'm sure, but ahead of a lot of others. And so I started showing them how to use LinkedIn, how to build a profile, how to kind of, you know, use it for their network. And unbeknownst to me, I had said about 10 years into my career that someday I'd like to be a professional speaker trainer, but I kind of forgot about that. And what ultimately happened was that meeting with people, sharing my experiences, teaching them something that I knew, turned into, once they became employed or they went back to organizations that they were a part of, they'd say, hey, we need to get Jennifer McClure in here to come and teach us how to use LinkedIn, or to come and teach our recruiters how to use social media to, you know, get our, weren't calling it employer brand back in 2006, but how to get our employer brand out there, how to use social media ourselves. And so the speaking kind of, you know, I'd always spoken in front of corporate training, you know, done that and spoken at all employee meetings and things, but being invited to come and speak actually came out of teaching other people what I knew. They found that valuable, and then they asked me to come and share with their organizations. So in 2010, I was doing enough speaking. It kind of started where I was just doing it, you know, for free, and then it was taking me away from my day job enough. And all this was with the recruiting firm's blessing. It helped their brand for me to be out there as well. I started charging a little bit to go in and speak, and then a little bit more, and eventually felt like I had built enough of a base and I was ready to take the step out on my own. So in 2010, started my own business as a full-time speaker, trainer. And I do a little consulting every now and then, not so much anymore. And I have an executive coaching certification, so I take on maybe 1 or 2 executive coaching clients a year. So that's the story of me and how I got to where I am today.
Nice, nice. So how many events would you say you speak at on a yearly basis right now?
Yeah, I guess I should update my website. I need to go back and count. It's definitely over 350. I'd say in the beginning, when I was, you know, speaking for some version of expenses only, or maybe even some free and, you know, a lower rate, I was at one point doing 50 to 60 events per year. And then after a few years in, and I began to target more keynotes and or only paid speaking events, it probably would be 30 to 50. Within the last couple of years, because I also have another business organization called Disrupt HR, and I've applied a lot of volunteer time to that, probably to, well, definitely to the detriment of my own business. I'd say the last couple of years, I've spoken 20 or 30 times a year. That is not what I would ideally like to be doing. I'd like to be doing more, but I've spent so much time kind of building the Disrupt HR community. I didn't spend enough time on developing my own business, et cetera. So for me as a full-time speaker, I'd say ideally, and again, I am at a point where I love the travel. I like to be out and about, so I don't have young kids at home or anything like that. You know, and so some people have to make decisions to, you know, the season of life that they're in, but I'd like to be speaking anywhere from 40 to 50 to 60 times a year. And hopefully after we get through this current season that we're in, I'll be able to get back to that.
Did you initially start out speaking for free? At what point did you start to get paid for what you do?
I did, yeah. It just kind of turned into, you know, one of the executives maybe that I had connected with would say, hey, you know, I'm a part of this ExecuNet group, or this church organization that helps job seekers, or my church, reached out to me and said, hey, can you come in and share your tips on networking and using LinkedIn and whatever with our organization? And so I did that for free. And then, as I said, it kind of became, as an executive search consultant, it was 100% commission. So anytime that I wasn't recruiting, I wasn't going to be making money. So I started at some point charging, just enough to maybe knock off a few of the free events, so maybe $250, $500, so not anything life-changing. And then once some larger organizations started to reach out to me, kind of raised the fee a little bit because I was developing a reputation and some expertise in a particular area. And so just over the years, depending on kind of how I'm progressing and how my brand has been built, have raised my fees accordingly. I'd say for anyone though, when I give, advice about speaking, I personally think there's still, I see a lot of chatter out there on Twitter about how, relatively new or newbie speakers are complaining that people are wanting them to speak for free. And I think there are two sides to that. Number one, yes, pardon?
I hear your opinion on this. I'm curious.
Yeah, anytime someone's speaking for free, that's certainly letting organizers know that that's an option, so in one way it's potentially taking money out of the pockets of people who speak professionally or want to get paid. On the other hand, I do believe there is a period of time, and for some people maybe it's shorter than others, where you need to be out there speaking as much as you can. You're not a proven entity, so you're going to need to get the reps in. And so every opportunity to speak for free, again, whether that's a church group or even a conference or an event or a professional association where you can get in front of an audience that's your target audience with your message, I think initially some of those are going to be free because you're an unknown entity. If someone's willing to give you a chance and it works for both of you to build your experience and your reputation, I think that's a good mutual exchange. At some point, if you are doing the right things, if you're building your brand, if you have a unique message or at least unique enough, then you're going to be in demand enough where I think you will be able to start. I think for me, the progression was I spoke for free. I asked to speak for free at some conferences or events that I was targeting, built relationships with the organizers. Then maybe after I'd spoken for free a year or two, in some cases, I would say, would you pay my expenses this year? And then after doing that for a period of time, it was, I'm only targeting paid events. And I think every speaker, I have a few events per year that I still do speak at for free because, again, there's a lot of reasons. Could be that I know there are people in this audience that I typically get several clients out of the meeting. An example would be for several years, I spoke at our Cincinnati Chambers leadership events. So they're women leadership group, where they select 40 or 50 community leaders and they put them through like a 12-week leadership development program. And for several years, I did a personal branding workshop for the women's leadership group. I also did it for the Leadership Cincinnati, for the Young Leaders Cincinnati. And those were all people from Fortune 500 companies, from law firms, from whatever. And I would typically probably get 3 or 4 additional speaking opportunities from being able to be in front of such of a rich kind of potential crowd. So I always, they never offered to pay me and I never asked to get paid. I still, to this day, I haven't spoken for them in probably 4 or 5 years, and I still get probably 2 or 3 gigs out of that a year from someone who says I was in the We Lead class, in 2015, and I'd like for you to come in and do your personal branding workshop at my organization. So I think at some point you get smart about, does it make sense to speak for this group for no compensation? And there's always, if at some point you have a choice, do you want to do it or not? So, you know, when I see people out there, again, relatively newbie speakers who are saying, oh, I can't believe, you know, this conference organizer just reached out to me and asked me to speak for free. I know there's a piece of me that maybe it's my age, you know, well, you've got to work for it because I did. I don't know. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, really? You expect to come out of the gate getting paid? You know, if you're not a best-selling author, like not just Amazon bestseller, although I would love to be one of those too. If you're not a best-selling, like New York Times best-selling author or a celebrity, or you walked up Mount Everest backwards blindfolded, you know, so in other words, there's some real reason to pay you right out of the gate to speak. I think there's a period of time where you just need to be out there getting reps.
How long did, and by the way, audience, feel free to chime in with questions as well, but I have a list of them I'm going to ask Jennifer. How long did it take you to get good at speaking, Jennifer, being a self-proclaimed introvert? What would you say was your tipping point?
Oh, wow. You probably have to ask somebody in the audience. Maybe some of those first audiences will be like, she's not good. I don't know. I think, you know, coming from a human resources background where I was, you know, always in front of people, I personally, thankfully, did not get the gene where I'm nervous. So, you know, whether it's a crowd of 10,000 or a crowd of 10, I'm able to get up there and deliver. So I think, you know, in terms of getting good, where I felt like I had a talk that absolutely hit the mark, had the right stories, had the right flow. The most popular keynote that I have is called The Future of HR, 4 Strategies for Delivering Maximum Impact in Your Organization. I think that's the rest of it. And the first time I gave that was at the Louisiana SHRM conference. That was my first real keynote. Thank you, Robin Schooling, if you guys have heard of Robin Schooling. She was the conference organizer, again, a friend, a relationship, someone I developed a relationship with who had seen me speak in smaller venues. And when she was selecting speakers for that event, invited me, I think it was 2013. And so that was the first time I did that Future of HR and got good feedback there. And I felt good about it. But that has evolved over the last 7 years. I keep it updated in terms of the data, but a good keynote like that, I think, is timeless. It's not about the future of HR is AI or this specific tool. It's about a mindset and how leaders should think, and the stories that go with that make it relevant, not just to HR leaders, but beyond. So I think getting that from 2013 to it was probably 2 or 3 years ago before it really locked in. You know, again, I tell a lot of stories and presentations, but now there are some specific stories in that talk. I know they work. They illustrate the points well. So I'm not just telling random stories now. And I'd say it probably took a good 3 to 4 years for that talk to become solid. So I think any speaker, again, you're going to get better. You're going to know how to, there will be times when you come into a room where, for whatever reason, the audience is just not with you, or the setup is really not conducive to people being engaged with you. And you've got to be able to recognize that and figure out how to adjust. And there will be times where if you do get to larger and larger audiences, the same talk that could kill in a room with 300 people where it is kind of, I can still connect with people. The lights are up enough that maybe I can see faces and nodding heads and whatever. Or then you get to a room where there's 3,000 people and the lights are dark and you can't see anything except the light in your face. You have to bring a whole other level of energy to that, because I do feed off the audience. So when I can't see the audience or they're spread out enough that I can't feel like I'm connecting with everyone in the room, I think that's where professionalism as a speaker comes in. You know enough now about, you have to amp, even as an introvert, I have to amp my energy up. I have to be more demonstrative. I have to have rise and fall in my voice. I tend to be a little monotone in my normal everyday life, and I got feedback on that early on. So I have to remember, got to overemphasize things, especially in a bigger room like that. So that's the kinds of things that I think you learn over time as a speaker. Maybe you start speaking in a room of 10 people, and then eventually you're in a room of 100, and then you're in a room of 1,000. You can give the same talk to all of those groups, but you're going to have to do more the larger the groups get.
Yeah. Regina, did you have a question?
I did. So when you first started, Jennifer, did you have like one or two specific topics that you always spoke on, or did you create tailored presentations depending on the event or the group that you were talking
I think
to?
that's a great question, and certainly one where I think a lot of new speakers get tripped up. In the beginning, as I said, I was teaching people how to use LinkedIn. I was sharing my own personal transition story, my networking, what I learned about networking, et cetera. So that's what people were asking me to come in. That turned into, again, I'm an executive search consultant, filling high-level positions for organizations. And it turned into, once people said, oh, she knows LinkedIn, and I see she has a blog now, and she's on Twitter, she can come and teach us how to use social media for recruiting or HR. And so I always said, this was again 2006, 7, 8 maybe. I never wanted to be like a social media consultant. Did not consider myself an expert in that by any means. But because of the timing of social media was really coming on the scene, HR was still saying, no to social media, recruiters were trying to figure out. And so there was a lot of demand at that time for how to use social media in HR and recruiting. And so probably if you look back at my schedule, which nobody would, but I do, probably 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I was speaking primarily about how to use social media and HR and recruiting, because that's what people wanted from me. That is not what I wanted my business to be. I wasn't in business for myself yet, but that's what the market demanded of me. I had an expertise. I was using it. I had used it to develop my brand. I was also being asked to talk about personal branding because I kind of had to reinvent myself. So the market kind of told me what it wanted to hear for, I'd say, the first several years of my speaking. And then I reached a point after I started my own business in 2010, so again, maybe a couple of years into that, 2012 or so, where I said, I don't want to be a social media speaker, never wanted to be a social media speaker. I want to be more about, and again, not just HR. And of course, I was a couple years out of recruiting as a practitioner at that point. So I can talk high level about recruiting and candidate experience and how to engage with candidates, but I can't talk anymore about the nuts and bolts of, the day-to-day recruiting stuff. So I made a decision to say, I want to start speaking about strategic HR. I want to start speaking about, again, that kind of high level, what you should be thinking about in terms of strategy and talent strategy. So I started then pitching organizations on, I want to talk about this. Or even if they reached out to me and said, hey, can you come to our conference and speak about how to use HR and social media recruiting? I'd say, I can do that. And I could also do another session for you on this. So it probably took, another year or two to start going in the direction finally, after several years of speaking about what people told me they wanted to hear from me about, which were things that I knew. When someone asked me, how do I get started in speaking? I say, teach people what you know. And if what you know is not necessarily what you want to talk about today, then you're going to have to do that over time. And I think for me, I taught what I knew. I also know about, kind of talent strategy and strategic HR and leadership and influence and personal branding, but I had to convince people and get, again, people, even after being a professional speaker, to take a chance on me in a new arena. So I think it's, in the beginning, teach what you know. If there are things that you want to speak about beyond that, once you've built a reputation as a good speaker, then there will be people who will allow you to have the opportunity to try something new. Does that answer your question?
Nice.
Good.
What other topics kind of top of mind today, Jennifer, as far as strategic HR stuff goes? I mean, is there anything new emerging around that?
Well, the last 2 weeks has emerged. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. Again,
This
I
whole,
have
you know, this whole, there's a whole remote work is having a moment right now.
yeah,
I'm
definitely.
seeing a lot
The other
of
person,
HRs.
again, and you see that out there, people who have some expertise in remote work, or, they're doing videos, they're saying, I can teach your organization. You don't want to certainly hop on in a negative way a trend like that, but this is a great opportunity for people who do have expertise in that to share for free, again, your expertise, build value, be seen as an expert, and then if and when in the market allows, then you'll be seen as someone who provided value, who has expertise, and you'll be the first person to come to mind. In terms of what's now, I think it's interesting. I do have a talk called The Future of HR. But again, I think it's the future of leadership, really. And I get asked a lot, whether it's on a podcast interview or any kind of interview, people will say things like, well, what is the future of HR? And my response to that for years has been, I think, when I'm asked about the future of HR, when I go to conferences and I see the keynotes, especially at a tech conference, whether it's Josh Bersin or someone else, and they are futurists in the sense of they're thinking about, how do we use learning management systems and AI and all these things that I need a few people way out front kind of thinking about that stuff. But I always go back to probably 90% of the businesses in the US, at least, maybe I think it's even more than that, are small businesses with less than 100 employees. So another, 2 or 3% of those are probably 1,000 or less employees. And so when we constantly talk about the future of HR being all of these tech things and all of these, kind of enterprise solutions, there's a whole group of people that are really left out of that conversation. And they're not ready to implement, Workday or the latest, they may still using Excel spreadsheets. That's just the reality of the majority of the workplaces out there. So I've always kind of talked about, I'm here to help the everyday HR leader, recruiting leader, business leader think about how they can best serve the needs of their employees today with some old school tools and some new school tools, but it's really about humans and relationships, and how do we treat people, and how do we understand our values and what we bring to the table. And so that's what I kind of play in that space. I saw yesterday Jason Aberbrook, I always say his name wrong. He's got a hashtag out there now where he's talking about the now of work, that now is not the time to be talking about the future of work, is to be talking about the now of work. So I'm like, it's like a lot of things. You go, well, why didn't I think of that now of work? Because I've really been talking about the now of work for years. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for organizations to shore up existing processes, to be more human in how they interact with employees, to think about how they have established values and principles in their organizations and how they communicate the culture as it is. There's so much opportunity in that space. Again, I'll let some people run ahead with some of those forward-thinking things and follow those trends, but there are a lot of work, a lot of good blocking and tackling that can be done in organizations today to shore up the foundations. And certainly with what's going on in the world today, those foundations are critical and important. And I think we'll see organizations that didn't have that. Those will be the ones that either don't survive or have real difficulty in coming back. The ones that do may get through, with some difficulty, but they'll do better. So I think, yeah, we're probably going to be taking a step back for a period of time on all the future talk and thinking about the now of work.
Yeah, getting those basics right are something a lot of companies still struggle with overall.
Yeah, I don't think there's any HR leader out there right now, probably in the world, that's sitting around going, what HRIS system do I need to, be more fit? No, they're like, how do I communicate with my people? how do I make sure that our people know that we're going to get through this? How do we make sure that our people understand what they need to do in order to serve our customers? We're going back to the basics.
Totally. Jennifer, any resources out there you could point us to in terms of how to become a better speaker or just overall?
I think, yeah, I'm not a member of the National Speakers Association, and that's not because I should. It's more because we don't really have a chapter near me that I've been able to get to, but it is a global or a national organization. So if you are truly interested in like speaking full time or even as a good chunk of your business, look into the National Speakers Association. They have an annual conference, hopefully in July again this year. And that's a great organization for resources for everyone from newbie speakers up to people who are performers or otherwise, and there are a lot of good people involved with that. I tend to listen to a lot of podcasts from a lot of marketing and branding, online entrepreneur stuff, and I have 3 or 4 speaking podcasts that I listen to. One of my favorites is the National Speakers Association podcast, which is free even to non-members. So it's called Voices of Experience. There's another podcast by Jay Baer, who's a highly paid keynote speaker, where he's interviewing some of the other really top professionals, and it's called Standing Ovation. And then someone that I've followed for years, Jane Atkinson, has a website and a podcast and coaching programs, et cetera, called The Wealthy Speaker. And her book is what I would recommend to any speaker, called The Wealthy Speaker. There's a 2.0 version now, and it's very good from like how to set yourself up, how to choose your topic, how to pick your lane for what you're speaking, and then a little bit on the business side of that. Kind of on the flip side of that, another book that I read, right when I first started it, along with Jane's book, is called $1 Million Speaker. It's by a guy named Alan Weiss, who has kind of the $1 million brand. So he has $1 million consultant, $1 million everything. I think if you read his book, $1 Million Speaker, and Jane Atkinson's book, The Wealthy Speaker, they're kind of two sides of the coin. Jane came out of like the Speakers Bureau industry, so she has kind of a perspective on how you can build kind of a good marketable, referable speech. Alan Weiss comes out of, more of the opposite side of maybe a little bit more going rogue and being on your own. So, regardless of how you want to do this, I think if you read both of those, they're great books to kind of help give you some ideas. I still go back. I've read Jane's book now twice. I'll probably read it again here soon because I think it's just a good foundational book, even though I'm 11 years into my business. And again, her coaching programs, I know people who've gone through those. She has both group coaching, individual coaching, and now a Wealthy Speaker School. So those are some podcasts, some books. There is another one out there called The Speaker Lab. That's a podcast with Grant Baldwin. He interviews, that kind of runs the whole gamut from the business speaking to how to deliver a good talk, et cetera. And he has an online training program and just came out with a book. I bought it. I don't remember what it's called, but it just launched a couple of weeks ago. So it's probably a very good book. I'd say, I also have some speaker training and development. And so I've kind of looked at it as like, to me, Grant Baldwin's The Speaker Lab stuff is probably for that emerging speaker who's looking to maybe eventually get to booking speaking engagements in probably the, $1,000 to $5,000 range. Although, I mean, it works for higher level, but it's a lot of the how to set up your systems. I'd say Jane Atkinson's resources are really more how do you get to, again, picking your lane. She's a big fan on you, like I said earlier, I spoke about social media, personal branding, starting a business, networking, all those things. That's too much. That's just what I did in the beginning because that's what people asked me. But if you want to start making money at it, you really kind of need to pick a lane. And so mine is that kind of talent leadership lane that I'm in, and I still get to speak about a lot of those topics, but I think she's very good and her resources are very good on helping you to hone your craft and maybe get to that high level keynote speaker, paid speaker. And then if you want to go to the performance side of it, if let's say you're comfortable with that, heroic public speaking is more around, it's a more high-end program where they work with you on the craft of like where you stand on stage and how you deliver the message and, you know, what your stories look like and all that. And then another book, storytelling is all the rage now in both marketing and the world, but certainly in speaking. Stories are going to be the key to your success as you maybe move into keynotes or charging more in the beginning. You know, a breakout session or a workshop, really you're teaching 4 or 5 key points. When you get into the keynote, even if you're talking about a business related topic, you still need to motivate and inspire people. And that's more than likely going to be more story related. So a good book is called Stories That Stick. Kendra Hall, Kindra Hall. She's really emerged over the last few years as probably one of the darlings of the speaking industry now. She has a great talk, a great story, and she teaches storytelling. So both the book is great, but she has some workshops and some online programs that she's coming out with as well. And she does a great job from a speaking perspective on Instagram. If you follow her on Instagram, of course, not right now. She, like a lot of us in the speaking world, is kind of grounded, but when she's active out there on the road and speaking, she's always sharing like, you know, the behind the scenes of going to the sound check, the behind the scenes of what it's like to be going on stage. And so she's personable and friendly, and I think someone to kind of, we can all aspire. She's getting paid a lot of money now per talk. And so that would be someone to kind of like, that's a range of folks you can follow there that I think would be great resources.
That's nice. Hey, what's the craziest thing that ever happened to you on stage while you're speaking?
You know, I've heard speakers say fall off stage and all that. You know, fire alarm. I've not had a fire alarm or anything yet, or anybody in the audience get it. So I don't really have a good crazy speaking story. I know it will come, but I think you have to be comfortable with yourself and the message that you're delivering, and then whatever happens. I think I listened to a podcast yesterday from Brendan Bouchard. Also, he speaks, but he does a lot of things, where he was talking about basically how to handle crisis. And he shared the example of being on stage in one of his workshops where someone had a seizure, and you know, thousands of people in the room, and people started panicking and freaking out. And he said, you have to remember, when you're on stage, you are the leader and you are in charge. So whether it's, again, speakers who've had to deal with fire drills or fire alarms going off, or someone getting, once you are up on the stage, you're the expert, you're the leader. So your ability to remain calm, even if you fall off the stage, whatever, you've got to get back up, because people are looking to you and they see you in that role, and it's a very important role. So it doesn't hurt to think about how you would respond and pay attention if you are in an environment where something, an emergency or something weird happens. I mean, I've been up, can maybe answer your question a little bit. We're not weirdest, but it's happened more than once, and it will happen again. You're up there, you got your PowerPoint going, and the light goes out on the projector, or you get there and you can't hook up your computer. I had that happen early on. We're supposed to be doing a workshop, which, you know, there are a lot of slides with, here's the 5 things you need to do. And we just could not get the laptop hooked up. And so I just said, hey, you guys are here. I'm happy to do a Q&A. What are your questions? It was about using social media and HR recruiting. I said, what are your questions? And I probably, here I am 11 years into the full-time speaking. That's probably the best feedback I've ever gotten, because they actually enjoyed that more. They got their questions answered. So it wasn't, you know, hey, we need to cancel because I can't hook up my laptop. And I also didn't take 20 minutes trying to hook it up. I've been, you know, in other sessions where the laptop's not working and the speaker's up there with the tech crew and it's 20 minutes after it's, but don't do that. Make a decision that you can either deliver something without your slides, if the slide projector goes out, or again, all kinds of things happen where your slides, I keep going. And it's happened multiple times where the mic is going out or something, and I keep going, and they bring me, I was speaking in Trinidad and Tobago a couple of years ago. They had put the lavalier mic on, and I'm a girl, so it was underneath my dress, got on stage, and it went out. And it was a big sound crew across the side of the room. I see they're like on it. So I just keep going. I walked over to the podium where the person who had introduced me spoke, and I just stood. I don't like to stand behind the podium, but I stood there and I kept going. He came up and he brought me another lavalier mic. I let him do his thing and behind my dress. I kept talking. That one didn't work, so he ran back. He got a handheld mic. I kept talking the whole time, and afterwards, people came up and said, "Good talk, enjoy whatever." But I got way more comments, and then the feedback forums were like, "You were so professional. You kept going. I've never seen anybody do that." And that probably happens 4 or 5 times a year where there's a sound issue or something. I think if it's to the point, like I was speaking at a conference earlier last year, where there was a scratchy noise on the mic. And again, I can see the sound tech people are running around trying to get, and I kept going. And I think at some point I was in a program with another speaker where it was so annoying. She stopped and said, "We're going to take just a second and take care of this." Because I think I was teetering on the edge where the audience probably wasn't listening to me because everybody's looking around going, "Are they going to fix that?" So you have to learn that, but always be in control, even when weird things happen.
Nice, nice. So Jen, Disrupt HR, one of my favorite networking events. The one in New York just got canceled, obviously, but give us the quick history of that. How did you get started with it? And let's talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I think I always tell people, surround yourself with smart people who don't think like you do. And I just happened to be lucky enough. I met a young man at an HR networking event several years ago. I think I was at the recruiting firm. Yeah, I was at the recruit. So this again would have been before 2010. Met him. He was a startup guy, tech guy, had an HR technology product called Black Book HR that he had founded kind of out of his own experience of being an employee and a candidate for jobs. And so smart on him, he showed up at the HR Association meeting to try to meet HR people. And I guess I took pity on him because nobody really wants to talk to vendors at HR Association or recruiters at HR Association meetings. And so he asked if I would advise his, be an advisor for his firm. And I said, sure, an unpaid advisor. And so we met a couple of times a year just to have lunch, and he would ask me questions or, share what was new with their product. And I always say I love being around people like that, entrepreneurial people, startup, people. Someone like Chris Ostich is his name. He's the kind of person that no idea is a bad idea. Every idea, his skill set, his gift is, we can make this work. And so we were at lunch, and I'd kind of gotten the update on where he was at with his company. And he said, "What's new with you? What are you thinking?" And I said, "Well, I'm a couple years into this speaking thing now, so I am speaking at a lot of particularly HR and recruiting conferences and events, and I'm doing 40, 50 of those a year. And while I know my experience is not the same and as an attendee who may be the only conference that they go to all year, because I'm at 40 or 50 different ones, I see a lot of the same speakers and I hear a lot of the same topics. If it's an HR conference, it's compliance, it's FMLA, there's a lawyer, there's somebody talking about using social media in HR recruiting, which was me at the time. And I said, I would love to eventually have my own event in Cincinnati where I invited some cool people that I've met, like you, Chris, startup people or whatever, who have a different perspective, and to give them an opportunity to share. And I just kind of threw that idea out there. And again, when you're talking with the right people, he was like, "That's a great idea." And he got his little notepad out. And he said, like, "Well, have you thought about this?" And I'm like, I just have ideas. I don't do anything with them.
What year is this?
This was So Disrupt HR 2000, this would have been 2013, probably summer 2013. And so I just left our lunch meeting and kind of went back to what I was doing. And maybe a week or two later, he called me or reached out to me and said, I've been thinking about this. I think it's a great idea. And at the time, he was the community organizer for Ignite events in Cincinnati. So if you're familiar with Ignite talks, they're 5 minutes with 20 slides that automatically advance every 15 seconds. They're usually open. They take applications from people in the community, and a lot of times they talk about, you know, community issues or environmental issues. And so when he reached out to me, he said, I think we should do this. Why don't we use that Ignite format? And at the time, he had some Fortune 500 clients in Cincinnati. Plus, again, he's in the startup community. We have a couple of, or several startup incubators here in Cincinnati. And he said, I think we can get some cool people to come and give that Ignite style talk. We'll call it Disrupt HR. Are you in? I'm like, let's do it. So he gets credit for being the founder of Disrupt HR, because I'd say there's a 90% chance it probably would never have gone anywhere from I'd have had an event, but it wouldn't have been what Disrupt HR has turned into. So we held the first event December 2013. There were people from startups here in Cincinnati. There were people, an HR person from Procter & Gamble, which I've been in Cincinnati 26 years. My ex-husband worked for Procter & Gamble. I don't think I'd ever met an HR person from Procter & Gamble. They don't go out in the wild. So Chris was able to get one of them. I spoke, I did a talk on awesomeness, still one of the most popular talks out there today. And Chris talked about big data bullshit. So, you know, we had people that we said, you can talk like you talk at work. If you use 4-letter words, go ahead. We had it at a microbrewery, gave away beers, and there were cornhole games around and picnic tables for people to sit on. And people loved it. And a friend of mine was speaking at an event in Indianapolis the next day. So I told her she had to drive over the night before to come to our event, and she did. And she had a great time and said, could I do this in Denver? So her name's Mary Faulkner, and we said, sure, we'll help you. So Chris and his team kind of helped Mary. Here's how we did the Eventbrite ticket registrations. Here's how we selected speakers. Here's how you publicize it. And so Mary did that. And I think after that, we put the videos online, and then a friend of mine from Toronto reached out, Jeff Waldman, and said, this looks cool. Can we do this in Toronto? And so for about 1.5 years, it was just people who we knew, I knew, or Chris knew, reaching out and saying, hey, can we do this in our city? And about 1.5 years in, mid-2015, Chris was exiting the HR technology company and co-founding a company that's not in the HR space. He sent out an announcement and said, you know, I'm going to be leaving Black Book and doing this new thing. And I said, hey, you know, what's going to happen with Disrupt HR? And he said, let's form a partnership and make it a thing, because it seems like more and more people are interested in it. So July of 2015, we formed Disrupt HR LLC. We put our own money into building out the website, the video hosting, all that. I think we had maybe 14 licensed cities around the world then, mostly in, well, probably all in Canada or the US. And so fast forward to today, we've got over 157 licensed cities in 35 countries around the world. There've been over 5,000 Disrupt HR talks given, over 400 events held. And they're just fun events where people give 5-minute, 20-slide, 15-second talks about any topic related to the workplace, and even that's loosely interpreted. I don't know if awesomeness was related to the workplace, but I talked about that. And I think
Plus, we're in the New York one.
Yeah, it's something that I'm really proud of. A lot of things about Disrupt HR. Again, I'm still a volunteer with Disrupt HR, which again is a part of a problem, because it's definitely taken away from my own business. But I feel kind of like a stewardship for the community now, for our volunteer organizers as well. But what I love about Disrupt HR is that not only have I seen it, heard from people, it is a place where anyone can give a talk. I mean, obviously there's application process and the organizers choose their speakers, but I personally love it when someone gets up on stage who's never talked before, never wants to speak on a big conference stage, or maybe they have an idea and they're just not able to get invited to speak on a conference stage because they don't have a reputation or it's a topic outside of their, expertise, and that they have an opportunity to do that. So yeah, it's great to see a great disruptive HR talk about something that really is disruptive. Sometimes I'll see a comment from somebody like, there's nothing disruptive about that talk. Well, the fact that someone challenged themselves to get up and share an idea, or just to get past their fear of speaking on stage, I'm cool with that. So of the 5,000 talks, I'd say probably 500 or less are like 5-star stellar talks. There are probably at least 500 that are really, really terrible. And then there's that, 4,000 in the middle that is somewhere between. Some of them are really good, some of them are just okay. But I'm okay with all of that. I love it all.
Nice. Well, yeah, certainly appreciate the time today, Jen. Does anybody else have any further questions for Jennifer at this point? We're getting close to 5 here.
I'd just like to say thank you to you, Chris, for getting this arranged, and also obviously to Jennifer for sharing all of these great resources. I can't wait to check out some of these books. I think it's going to be really informative. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And certainly if we're not connected on LinkedIn, seems like a lot of people are doing that while they're working from home. So feel free to send me a LinkedIn invite. Let me know that you were on this call, so that I'll be sure to connect. That's how we connected. And if you have further questions, I do have a podcast called Impact Makers with Jennifer McClure, and it will be back up and running now that I'm in my apartment. But there are some great episodes out there. And actually the very last episode of the Impact Makers podcast, I shared the audio of my Future of HR talk that it was from SHRM. It was a mega session at SHRM Annual in 2016, I believe. And I was just kind of going through and cleaning out some of the audio in my computer to make space. And I heard that and I'm like, this is probably one of the best talks of that talk that I've given. So I shared it on my podcast. And as I said in my show notes, I think from a speaking perspective, even if you're not in human resources and you're just more interested in speaking, if you listen to the flow of that talk, and it's even better today than it, this is probably a couple of years later, 2016, 4 years later. So it's even tighter now, because SHRM talks then were 1 hour 15. Now they're 1 hour. And of course, sometimes people ask me to do it in 45 minutes. So a couple of the stories in there have been taken out, or things have been shortened. But it's I think, if I say so myself, it's a good example of a talk that starts with a good story, or at least a story that brings you in. There are 4 points, so 3 to 5 points is what they'd probably tell you to put into any talk. So there are 4 points in that. Each point has at least one story. Now I'm down to 1 story. I think I told a couple with some of those in the audio. And then I have some takeaways. So there's 5 takeaways. And then I end with a story that is memorable, that maybe you think is not related to what I'm talking about, but I am able to kind of circle it back and bring it all together at the end. And so when I give that talk, people come up and, maybe they resonated with one of the points, but most of the time they have something to say about one of the stories. So it's not perfect, but I think, again, would love for you to subscribe to the podcast, because there will be new episodes coming out starting next week. There are some episodes out there about personal branding. There are some interviews with a lot of HR influencers and thought leaders in the space, as well as just some people that are in my own personal network that I think have made an impact and are making an impact. So I'd love for you to start with episode 1, but you could go to 39, and that's the Future of HR keynote, and it would be a great place to listen, and would love to hear your feedback if you have any.
Nice. And the podcast, it's on jennifermcclure.net.
Yes, go there too.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, this is recorded, so I'll put it up on YouTube later on, and I'll also transcribe it as well for the HR Answers blog, so you can all go read back and case you missed anything. And Jennifer will certainly link out to all your stuff once I do that. So again, appreciate your time today, and thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you. You guys have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jennifer.
See you next week.
Mhm.